Hey guys, it's Sam Limon and I want to welcome you to our graphic design classes. In this tutorial, we're going to be getting our feet wet with Photoshop. So this project or this exercise follows the previous exercise where we learned how to zoom in, zoom out, where all of our panels and our tools were in Photoshop. Here, we're actually going to get into Photoshop and start manipulating some pixels or some images and start putting things together and moving things around and resizing. So a lot of like the basic stuff. So this is going to be pretty introductory. So it's going to be either our first exercise, or for some of you it might just be like a little refresher if you're familiar with Photoshop or if you've taken one of my classes before. So first thing you're going to do is you're going to go into our course. So right now I'm on my fundamentals. This is spring 2023, so it might look a little bit different depending on when you do this, but I'm gonna try to keep this all together the same. So you're gonna go into week 1, our intro week. Go ahead and open that, and you should see this Photoshop practice exercises.zip folder. So you're gonna go ahead and download that, and then we also have this project submission. This is where this is gonna get submitted once we're done. So I'll show you that. But you're going to click on Photoshop Practice Exercises.zip, and you're going to go ahead and click on the again once this folder shows up, and that downloads it. So what you're going to do now is, after you download it, either create a folder, or if you already have a folder on your desktop, that's great. For now, this folder works in our desktop, but just remember, and I will keep repeating this, so these are shared computers, so eventually you do want to have either a USB drive or an external hard drive to save all of your work, because files do get lost. People accidentally delete files, so you do not want that happening to you. You want to keep your work with you, so I highly recommend it. Unfortunately, if your work gets lost, there's really nothing I can do. You're just gonna have to redo it. So again, just be real careful with your stuff. So for now, just create a folder. I have one named Sam Limon. So this is where I'm going to work on for all the projects in our class. So go ahead and open that. Now, if you notice, I already have a bunch of files here. So these are a bunch of assignments that I've worked on. What you're going to do now is you're going to go into your downloads folder. So I'm going to open up my downloads folder, and I'm going to drag my Photoshop practice exercises file that I just downloaded from Schoology, and I'm going to drag that into my folder. I already had it, so I'm just going to simply replace it, but if not, you should have it here. And now you have the folder or the file within your folder. And then what you're going to do is go ahead and unzip this folder. To do so, you're going to just double click on a Mac, and it's going to give you another folder here. So you notice the difference between the zippered file. So it's a zipped file, and the blue folder here. And I could see that it has a couple images in here. So I'm going to have a meadow, sunset, a bird silhouette, and this weighbridge. I'm getting the names from here, the name from the actual file, a weighbridge house. And if you are on a PC, what you're going to do is, once you select your zip folder, I believe somewhere on the top it's going to say extract all. So you're going to extract it. It's going to create another folder, and again, it's not going to have the little zipper icon, and you should have these 3 files. If you need help at any time, just go ahead and call me over and we'll get you the files. Okay, so now after this, what you want to do is you want to get Photoshop opened up. So by now you should already have access to Photoshop, and we are going to just go ahead and open it up and log in. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go to File, Open, and then you want to navigate to our folder. So I have my Sam Limon folder open, and we're going to navigate to our Photoshop Practice Exercises folder, and I want you to go ahead and select this beautiful meadow sunset file, and go ahead and click Open. Now, first things first, if you notice, if I go to, I'm going to click on my move tool here. If you notice, the name of this file is Beautiful Meadow Landscape Sunset JPEG. So this is a JPEG folder, JPEG file, excuse me. JPEGs do not support layers, so everything is just one layer. You could tell by our layers panel here. If you don't have it, you simply click on layers, and if you don't have it there, you go to window and layers, and that should open it up. Now you see the background is simply one layer, and we'll get into that in a bit, a little bit more into layers. The way you could think about this layer is it's a painting, a solid painting on a canvas, and you cannot move each individual tree, you cannot move the sun. It is all kind of burned into the image as one solid piece. So what I want to do first is I want to turn this into a Photoshop file. Photoshop files support layers. So go ahead and go to File, Save As. Make sure it's Save As, not Save. And then we're going to simply rename this to Photoshop. I'm just going to shorten it by doing PS. And then Practice Exercise. And go ahead and put your last name or your name on it. So I'm going to name it PS Practice Exercise hyphen Limon. Right now it's a JPEG, but we're going to go to Format, and I believe on a PC it might be File Type, and we're going to click on this and we're going to change this to Photoshop, or it might say .psd. .psd simply stands for Photoshop document. So go ahead and click that. Now we see our name changed here. So that is the extension that tells the computer what file type it is. It is now a Photoshop file. And go ahead and save it in the same Photoshop Practice Exercise folder. So along with all the other images we downloaded, and go ahead and click on Save. Okay, so now that we have this saved, it's a Photoshop file. We could tell right here by the name. We want to start bringing other images in. So let's go to File, Open. And let's go ahead and open up the next one, which is the bird flying silhouette JPEG. Go ahead and click Open. And now if you see, we have a second tab open. We have our Photoshop Practice Exercise. Now we have this bird flying silhouette. And let's go ahead and drag this image into the Photoshop Practice Exercise. If you recall, when we did the interface section, if we go to Window and Arrange and Tool Up Vertical, you could simply click and drag as long as you're on your move tool. So click on your move tool. You could click and drag on this bird, drag it over to our meadow image, our practice exercise, drop it, and now we could see it covered it, and I could move it around here. So that's one way to move an image. So you could do that. Or if I go back to Window, Arrange, Consolidate Alt tabs, if I click on my bird flying silhouette, if I open up my layers panel, again, if you don't have it, go to Window and Layers, and you should be able to open it. Now I see the layer here named background, and it's this silhouette of the bird. And you could click on the layer, not in here, but on the layer itself, drag it over to our practice exercise tab, and bring it in here and let it go. Make sure you bring it down in here, because a lot of people, what they do is they drag it over here onto the tab and then they just release, and that's not going to place it. You have to make sure to, let me delete this and redo it. You have to make sure to drag it over and bring it down and into our artboard here, and then release it. So once you do that, we no longer need this silhouette, so we could close this, and if it says to save it, just don't save it. And then we have, if we see our layers panel, the silhouette is in a second layer here. So now what we want to do is we want to transform this. This image is very overpowering. It's taking over the whole artboard here. So what we want to do is scale it down. To do that, we want to make sure this layer is selected. We could tell because it is highlighted. So layer 1 is highlighted. And we're going to go to Edit and Free Transform, or Command or Control T is a shortcut. So if I could do Command or Control T, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom out. So I'm going to use shortcuts here. Try to get used to these shortcuts. I'm going to do Command or Control minus, and that's going to let me zoom out. And now I see the bounding box for this image. Now if I click a corner and drag down, that is how we resize. And then now if I put my cursor in the middle here, somewhere in the white or black, just make sure you do not select this center icon here. So if I click and drag, I could place it over here. And then I'm going to do Command or Control plus to zoom in. And that is basically how I resize. So go ahead and resize the silhouette somewhere along here. It doesn't have to be exactly like this, but make sure it's roughly around this size. Now we are still in our free transform mode, so we have to either accept or decline this change. There's a couple of ways to do that. One way is if we look at our options bar up here and we have this little icon, that's going to cancel our change and it's going to go back to our original size. If we hit this check mark that says commit transform, so that's going to commit to this size, or we could simply just press enter or return on our keyboard. So I'm going to hit the check mark. So now this image is resized and that size is accepted. So now another thing that we want to do is, you see all this white around the silhouette of the bird. What we want to do is we want to get rid of that. So first what we have to do is make a selection. So there's several selections in Photoshop. We're just going to use this basic one since this is a solid color. And we have our magic wand tool. So go ahead and click on this first, second, third, this fourth tool. If you do not see it, we might have our object selection tool. It looks like that. But if you click and hold on this fourth one, and you're going to have the magic wand tool. So go ahead and click on that. And it looks like a little magic wand. So now what you want to do is you want to click on the white here. We want to still make sure we're on layer 1. We have this selected. Go ahead and click on this white area. And immediately you notice this change here. So let me zoom in a little bit, Command or Control plus. And we have what's called these marching ants. So the marching ants are what shows us that something is selected. And we have them here along the bird silhouette as well. So Photoshop naturally detected the edge based on what our selection that we made, which was on white. So it's making that selection and it picks up all the edges. So now all we do is simply click on delete on our keyboard or backspace, and that's going to delete the white. Now if you notice, we still have our selection here, so we want to get rid of it. And how we do that is by going to select or deselect, and if you look to the right, we have our shortcut, which is Command or Control D. When I say Command or Control, it's because Command is going to be for a Mac computer and Control is going to be for a PC or a Windows computer. So let's just go ahead and click on deselect. So now that deselects it. So now I'm going to go ahead and transform this again. So I'm going to click on my move tool, which is the top left one, and I'm going to do Command or Control T for transform, and I'm going to drag this. So now one thing to note, if you're it just depends on how some of these computers are set up. I'm going to move this up. If when you click on the corner and it starts doing this, where it's not resizing proportionately, go ahead and undo that. So you could go to Edit and Undo, or Command or Control Z. And what you want to do is either hold Shift or not hold Shift, depending, like I said, depending on the computers. And then you could resize it where it scales perfectly. So we want to avoid this type of action on everything. Whether it's type or images like this, you do not want to squeeze them like that, or you do not want to squeeze them like this. We want to do this proportionately, like that. So let's go ahead and make it a little bit smaller, and let's put it somewhere here in the sky. And I'm going to press enter to accept this change. And there we go. Let's go ahead and save. Let's try to save often, so Command or Control S, or you could go to File and Save. And there's our shortcut, Command S or Control S. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and bring in our third image from the files we downloaded, which is going to be the house. So we're going to go to File, Open, and we are going to look for the file named Weighbridge 2017-024. Select that one and go ahead and click Open. So that opens it up in another tab. What we want to do is we want to go into our Layers panel again, and we want to click on that layer and drag it over to our Practice Exercise tab. And drag it down, remember, drag it down into the artboard right here, and go ahead and release it. And now we could go ahead and close the other tab. Just click X and that closes it. So now we have one Photoshop file with all of our different layers. Let's go ahead and move this down. So make sure we are on our move tool, And let's move this down to where we could see some of the top from the background and some of the bottom as well. We don't want it sticking up here or down below. We want it right in the center. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit. So now what we want to do is we want to get rid of the background here because we already have a background. We just want to place the house on this background. So let me just show you what happens when you try to use the magic wand tool. If you recall, the magic wand tool is only good for selecting a solid color. Now our background here is not a solid color. There's different tones of color, different shades. You know, we have light parts of the sky, we have dark parts of the clouds, dark parts of the sky, etc. So if we click on our magic wand tool and we just randomly click over here, you could see the selection that it makes. It pretty much selected like all the lights here. If I click over here, it selects the darks. So that's going to be impossible. So let's go ahead and deselect by going to select and deselect. What we want to do is think of a way that would make it easy for us to make a selection. And with this one, we have our polygonal lasso tool. Polygonal lasso tool allows us to, and if you hover over these tools, it shows you a quick animation of what it does. So that lets you select things with with sharp lines. So this house has a bunch of sharp lines, sharp edges, so we could use that to our advantage. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to use this to make that selection. So if you don't have this icon, if you can't see it, it's probably on the lasso tool, which is just this circle here. So click on the polygonal lasso tool. Now let me show you what this does, and I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. I could click once and let go. So that creates kind of a point, and wherever I move, I could see where the line is going. So if I click here and then go back, wherever I connect it, it gets this little circle on the icon. A little hard to see, but there it is. That lets you know that it's going to connect the shape, and it simply makes a selection out of it. So we're going to use this to make a selection out of our house. So I'm going to select and deselect. Now let me show you another thing. If I click and I accidentally do something that I didn't want to do, like let's say that, what I want to do is just double click, and that forces the selection, and then I could deselect. So select, deselect. Unfortunately, if that happens, you're going to have to start over, but don't worry, it's a selection. It's going to take some practice, so it's going to happen. So now what you want to do is we want to select the house, so we could just, let me just navigate this. We have a straight edge here. We're basically trying to get rid of the sky, so we're going to delete the sky. And we see we have this hard edge. We have this little part of the sky, so part like this little part of the roof, which is like a vent of some sort. We're going to leave that out and just navigate over here. It's up to you if you want to include this house, or if you just want to, you know, go down this way. And basically everything that's going to be outside of our selection, we're going to delete. Let me show you one thing what not to do. Don't click here and click here. Let's say this was our whole selection, because then what happens is we're going to have a little bit of that sky here, so we don't want that. So I'm going to do Command or Control D. We want our selection to be right inside, just a little bit inside, so we don't catch any of the sky. So better right on the edge or right inside, just ever so slightly. And this is where we're going to practice our moving around. So I'm going to deselect everything. Go ahead and choose a corner of the house, doesn't matter which side. And I'm using my space bar and clicking and dragging. So that lets me navigate. And then once I let go of my space bar, I'm back to my polygonal lasso tool. So I'm going to click on this corner, slightly inside, and then I'm going to move up to the right, but I want to use my space bar. Notice how that hand changes, and I'm going to click and drag. I'm still holding space bar. Now, as soon as I let go, I could see my tool again. I'm going to go up here and click here. I'm not worried about this little edge. If you want to get fancy, let me go ahead and double click and deselect. Again, I said if you ever mess up, unfortunately you're going to have to redo it. If you want to get fancy, you could go over here, and this is going to make a better selection. click here, click here. You're just basically clicking on all the points. But you don't have to. You could just go straight here and then go back down over here. And then in here. Now right here, let me zoom out a bit. Command or Control minus. It's up to you if you want to go this way, then go select that house, the back house, or if you want to go straight down, or if you just want to get this part. So I'm going to do the in between, and I'm going to get this part of the house. I'm going to zoom in. And I'm going to get this part of the fence. And I'm just going to go straight down here. When you come down here, you're going to select a little bit of the grass. So I'm going to go straight across here. Again, holding my space bar. This is going to take some practice. Select a little bit of the grass. And then I'm going to go up here and get this deck. I don't want to cut off that chair because that's going to look a little funny. So I'm simply going to go and click around here. It doesn't have to be a perfect selection, but let's try to do a decent job. And then I'm going to move up and then connect it back at our starting point, and you could see our icon. It gets that little circle. I'm going to click there. Now I get my marching ants, and this is how it's going to look. So this one looks a little bit different. It's okay, it's fine. That's just the way that the pixels are displayed, but we have our selection now. Now what we want to do is we want to delete the background. So I zoomed out by doing Command or Control minus. And now I simply want to delete. So if I click delete, if you notice, we deleted the selection that we wanted. So we want the opposite to delete. We want the outside, not the inside. So we could always undo by doing Command or Control Z, or edit, undo, clear. So that brings our house back. So we want to select the inverse. So we go to select up here and then inverse. Now we see our marching ants go around the whole image and on the house as well. So that lets us know that it's going to delete anything that is over here. Now if I press delete or backspace, that deletes everything that we wanted to delete. Now I could go to select and deselect. Now let's go ahead and make our house a little bit smaller. So I'm going to click on my move tool, and then I'm going to do Command or Control T, or go to edit, free transform. And now let's scale our house. Make sure again you do it proportionately. You don't want this to happen and you don't want this to happen. So make sure it's proportionate. And I want to go ahead and put it up here on this hill. So I'm going to make it a little small and set it here. Wherever you're happy with it, I'm going to press enter or return, or click on the check mark up here. So now I'm out of that free transform mode. Now let me go ahead and explain layers to you. So if you notice, we brought in 3 different photos. So there's the background, we have the bird, and we have the house. And we have 3 layers here. If I select layer 1, and if I select my move tool, I could click and drag, and that is the bird. So remember when I mentioned JPEGs do not support layers, Photoshop does. This is what it is. It looks all to be one cohesive unit, but we have separate layers, and you could build hundreds of layers. In fact, a lot of files that I would work on had hundreds of layers. So it could get very confusing. So it's a good practice, good habit to start naming your layers. So in order to rename a layer, I'm going to click on this little eye here, and I could turn this off and on, and I could see what layer that is. So this layer 2 is the house. So I'm going to double click on layer 2. Make sure you double click right on the layer name, not over here on the right, in the gray, or not over here on the thumbnail. So right on the name, and then I can name this house. Press return or enter. This doesn't have to be exact. This is just something so that you know what it is. It could be barn, it could be home, anything, as long as you know what it is. The same thing, layer 1, I could turn that off and on, and I could name it bird silhouettes or crow or something. I'm going to name it crow. Press return or enter. So there's my crow layer, and the background could either stay as background, could stay as meadow, sunset. I'm going to go ahead and leave this as background because I know what the background is. But if you want to go ahead and rename it, you could double click it and name it sunsets. Press return or enter. So now we have that layer named sunset. So now notice that the house in the layer stacking order is on top of the crow. So if I select the crow and I move it, make sure I'm on my move tool, and I move it over here, it is behind the house. And that's because it's under the house here. So you could think of these layers as, you know, somebody painted the sunsets, so nothing is movable there. However, somebody put a clear piece of glass right above the painting, and then on that clear piece of glass somebody painted the crow. Now another piece of glass was placed on top of there and somebody painted a house. So now you could move these pieces of glass above and below each other. So if I move the glass on top that has a house painted, if I move that, drag it below the crow, it is now underneath the crow. It's underneath the crow here, and we could see it underneath here. So we could play around with the stacking order of layers. So that's something very important to note. So now I'm going to take my crow. Right here is where we notice it, where they're right on top of each other. I'm going to move my crow over here. Now if I move them back, visually you can't tell a change because they're not interfering with each other. Where you could see the change is if they're stacked above each other. On the same note, if I take sunset above everything, it covers everything because there's pixels everywhere here. So it's just going to cover the crow and the house. Now if I start bringing the crow above the sunset, it's in the same place, and the house, if I drag that one above, there it is. So that's a little bit on layers and renaming them. So let's go ahead and save. Now that we have all this, Command or Control S. And let's go ahead and do a little bit of color correction. Now if you notice, the background here is a little bit warm, so it has colors more on the reddish, orangish, yellowish side. If you look at the house, it has more like of a blue hue to it. So the house is what's considered cool, and the background is considered warm. So it kind of doesn't match. So we want to do a little bit of color correction in order to make the house, the cool house, match the warm background. So we're going to make the house a little bit warmer. So in order to do that, we're going to make sure the house is selected in our layers here, in our layers panel. And we're going to go to Image, Adjustments, and go to Color Balance. Now, if we see here, we have like red on one side and cyan on the other. So they're opposite of each other. So since this image is a little bit more blue, we want to go away from the blue, so we want to go to the red side. And if I drag it just ever so slightly, you see it starts getting a little more red. So it starts matching immediately. These settings, you do not want to push it all the way, because if I go all the way, see how red it gets? So now it starts looking out of place as well. So you want to just go a little bit away from the blue and into the red. So I'm going to go into where this first box says +17. Now on this other one, we're going to go away from the green and into the magenta. So again, very slightly. So I'm going to go until the second box says -6. And then the last one, again, we are on the blue side on the house, so we want to go opposite of it. We want to go to the yellow side. Now what happens if I go to the blue side? It's going to make it really cool, really blue. So I want to go over here and maybe about -20. So play with the settings. This doesn't have to be my exact settings. It's just visually what looks good to you. I'm actually going to push this red a little bit more to +24. And I could turn my preview off and on to see the before and the after, and you could see that big difference that it makes. And when you're happy with it, go ahead and click OK. Now, if you zoom into the house, remember when we left that sharp edge at the bottom of the grass? Let's go ahead and take care of that and make it like blend in a little bit better. So we're going to click on our eraser tool, which is over here. It looks like a little eraser. Go ahead and click on it. Now, Let's go ahead and make the size smaller. If I put my cursor over here, you could see how big that eraser is. It is huge. So we want to click up here where you have a number and this brush here. Click on the drop down arrow, and I'm going to go to general brushes here and click on soft round. So we want a soft round brush, and I'm going to make the size smaller, go down to maybe about 9 pixels. Let's try 7 pixels. 7 pixels is good. So make sure 7 pixel size and a hardness of 0. So 0 is going to make it blend a little bit better. And I'll show you the difference in a bit. So go ahead, and once you have those settings set, press return or enter. Now just go ahead and click and erase this edge here. One thing to note too is make sure your mode here is on brush and your opacity is 100% and you are selected on the house layer. And just start clicking and dragging. You can make it jagged. The point here is to get rid of that hard line, and that lets the grass blend a little bit better. Now, you don't have to do this, but let me just show you what the difference is with the hardness of a brush. So again, you don't have to follow. Let me just show you. If I select my brush tool, and I'm going to go into that drop down, I'm going to go and click on a soft round brush, and I'm going to do about a 50 pixel brush. Now if I click and drag, see how it has that like slight feathered effect? Now if I change it to a hardness of 100% and I click and drag, it makes a really hard brush versus the soft one. So that's the difference between the brush hardness. And if I do about a 50% hardness, it's going to be somewhere in between. So that's the difference. So the same thing when we did that eraser, it was just so small, but it gives it a little bit more of a feathered look on that edge. So let me undo those, and let's go ahead and save. Okay, next, let's go ahead and play around with a little bit of type. So let me show you the type tool, which is right here. I'm going to click on this T. So there's two things you could do with type. Let me make sure I'm on the correct one, horizontal type, not vertical type. So if I click and drag on with the type tool, it's going to create a paragraph. And it's gonna basically create this box that I could resize. And notice if I resize it, it starts adding more text. And if I make it smaller, it starts pushing things around. So that's one way. I only recommend this if it's gonna be a paragraph. If it's gonna be like a headline or a single sentence, then don't click and drag. Let me click on my move tool and click delete. If I click on my type tool now, and if I just click once, now it just adds some random text and it creates a new layer. So I'm going to go ahead and type in sunset by the meadow. Now, in order to move this, I'm going to have to click on my move tool. Now I could move it around. Now to get back into the type mode, I'm going to click on my type tool, and I want to click right in between some letters. So now I'm within that same sentence. If I click, I'm going to click on my move tool, which gets me out of that type mode. If I click on my type tool, and if I click just away, if I think I'm close enough, didn't happen there. Let's say click here. What it does, it's gonna add another layer. So make sure that when you want to get back in there, you click right in between two letters. Click on your type tool, click inside, and that puts the cursor inside. So now let's say I want to select everything. I could do Command or Control A or select all. So that selects everything. Now up here in my options bar, I could change the font. So go ahead and change the font to something bold. Not that one. So something more bold like this, and you could change it. You could change the boldness depending on the font here, and you could change the size here. So you have this drop down. I could go to like 60, for example, or if I put my cursor on this these T's, I could click and drag to the left, and I have that size. Now if I want to change the color, right now it was white text. If I just click once, if I click 3 times, it selects the whole sentence. If I click on this square right here, I could click and drag to select different colors. So here I could see the before, or actually it calls it current, which was a white, and the new color. So every time I change it here, it's going to change it up here, and I could see what it's going to be. So let's go ahead and change it. Go ahead and choose a color. It doesn't matter what color. So I'm going to choose that and click OK. And it did not change it for some reason. I'm going to triple click it again. Click in here. There we go. So choose any color. Another thing you could do is if you go outside of here, and if you notice, it gets this little eyedropper tool. So you could sample something. So I could sample the sky and it turns it blue. You don't want to do that because, you know, you're going light blue against light blue, so it's hard to read. You could sample the green. You could sample, you know, part of this red chair. I'm going to go ahead and sample this mountain, which looks a little purplish, and click OK. And now I'm going to go ahead and click on my move tool to get out of that type mode. Now I'm going to go ahead and move my crow just a little bit to the right. So I'm going to select it, make sure I'm on my move tool, and move it to the right. Now I want to zoom out. I want to move Sunset by the Meadow. So I'm going to click on, well, first of all, make sure I'm on my move tool, select Sunset by the Meadow, this layer, and I'm going to move it down. Now, if you want to resize it another way, as opposed to resizing the letters, you could also do Command or Control T on this and resize it as well. So that works for anything. And press Return or Enter when you're happy with it. Okay, now let me show you a few little effects that we could do on type, or on any layer for that matter. I'm going to zoom in to the letters, or to the word meadow, and then in my layers panel I'm going to double click just to the right side of Sunset by the Meadow here, not on the letters because that is to change the name, but if I double click on the right over here, I get this layer style dialog box. Now I'm going to click on bevel and emboss. Make sure you don't click on this square, just go ahead and click on the words, and that's going to give you this pretty cool effect. Now your settings might be different depending on what somebody else used in the past. These settings are what's called sticky, so it's going to remember what was the last setting somebody used. So again, these are shared computers, so somebody might have set it to something, so it's going to look a little different. But let's go ahead and go to outer bevel, for example. Technique, set it to smooth. Change the depth to just go ahead and do like about 200%. Direction up, and then size, you could go ahead and bring it up to like a 4, and then soften it maybe like 2 pixels. So you can start seeing what it does. It gives you like a highlight and a shadow. You have your shading here. You can move it around. Basically, where do you want the sun or the light source coming from? So like the top left. So then the shadow is technically going to be on the bottom right. And you could set numbers here. So you could just drag that around. Gloss contour, if you click on that, I have the first one. But feel free to mess around with these settings, bring it up or down here. My highlight mode is overlay and it's white. So if I click on that, I could go white. I could go more like of a pinkish, and you could see I get the change there. I'm just going to simply leave it at white. Multiply is going to be your dark shadow here. So I mean, I could set that to like a green, for example, and then this one to like a maybe a yellow or something. So then you start seeing those effects. But I just want it to look like a highlight and a shadow, so I'm going to go to white, and on this one, shadow mode multiply, and I'm going to go to black. And there we go. So play around with these. You could also add a stroke, so click on stroke. I'm going to go ahead and choose under fill type, I'm going to choose a color. I'm going to choose position outside, and I could change the size here. So a stroke is just basically an outline. Now if I make my size to like 3 pixels, it's going to make it 3 pixels wide, so it's not a whole lot. And if I put it inside here, it's going to put the stroke inside, or I could do it on the center of the edges. So I always like to do it outside depending on what you're doing. And then under opacity, right now it's at 100%. If I put it at about 50, it's going to let some of that sky show through. And 0, well, you're not going to be able to see it at all. So we could do 100, and you could change the color here as well. So I could do that, drag this down, blue, etc. So I think I'm going to do like a purple, like a dark purple here, and click OK. You could also do, there's a bunch of different things here, and we'll get into more. You could do a drop shadow. You could do inner shadows, color overlays. This just completely covers it in color. So things like that, but I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So mess around with it. Once you're happy with something, you could go ahead and save it. So do Command or Control S. So that saves the Photoshop file. But what you want to do is you want to save a JPEG. So you're going to do, again, this is for once you're happy with it, you want to turn it in, go ahead and do File, Save As. And we're going to change this. We're going to leave the name the same, except we're going to change the format or the file type to a JPEG, and go ahead and click Save. And you want to make sure this quality is all the way at the highest, so quality 12, maximum, or you could just drag this slider all the way to the right and click OK. So now if you go into your folder with the files, you're going to notice we have 2 of these PS practice exercise files. One is a JPEG and one is a Photoshop document. So you could see the size difference. The Photoshop file is 13.4 megabytes. Now if I click on the JPEG, it looks the same, but it's 1.5 megabytes. So big difference there. Now if I go back to Photoshop and go to File, Open, and I open up the JPEG, because this is the Photoshop file. If I open up the JPEG file, if you notice the layers, we only have one layer and everything's burned in. That's what creating a JPEG does. It's something that you would deliver to the client. Unless they specifically wanted the Photoshop file with the layers, then they would need Photoshop to open it. So you have 2 different files that look exactly the same, except we have the Photoshop file and the JPEG. So once you're done with that, congratulations. It's probably one of your first times using Photoshop. If not, it's a good little way to get some practice, and you're going to go ahead and turn in the JPEG. So let me show you how to do that. You're going to close these. I'm going to minimize Photoshop. You're going to go back into Schoology, go back into week 1, and you're going to go to that Photoshop practice exercise project submission. Click on that. Now I'm on the teacher portal, so it's a little bit different, but you're going to have a place to submit it. And what you're going to do is you're going to read the instructions here. I say submit the Photoshop document of your practice exercise. I'm going to change this so it's going to read both. So I want you to go ahead and turn in both the Photoshop file and the JPEG. I'm probably going to blur this out because these are students and their grades, so I don't want to show that. But yeah, you should have the submit button, and then you could choose the file. And what you're going to do is you're going to choose both of these files, so the JPEG and the PSD of your Photoshop practice exercise, and turn both of those in, click submit, and I will go ahead and grade them. If you have any questions up to that point, just go ahead and ask me, call me, and I'll come over and I'll show you how to turn them in. But thank you once again, and welcome to class, and I hope you enjoyed this quick tutorial.